Skepticism refers to a range of epistemological doctrines that share the idea that we cannot come to know truth. Ranging from mild to radical skeptics, this doctrine calls into question whether anyone can ever really have knowledge at all. Skepticism of sense perception, science, and deductive reasoning are facets of this philosophy, whose roots go all the way back to Pyrrho of Elis, which is the origin of the term Pyrrhonism. Academic skeptics claim that no knowledge is attainable at all, whereas Pyrrhonians do not even make claims on the matter at all. Any who hold the truth claims are often referred to as dogmatists, and arguments such as Descartes' evil demon hypothesis and the infamous brain-in-a-vat simulation theory exist as thought experiments attempting to speak about and prove skepticism. A very common argument for skepticism is as follows. If a belief is justified, then it is either a basic justified belief or is inferentially justified. Premise 2. There are no basic justified beliefs, that is, beliefs that are self-evidently true. Premise 3. Therefore, all beliefs are inferentially justified. All beliefs held via inference are either A. in infinite regress, or B. are argued for in circles. Well, no belief can be justified in virtue of being in an infinite chain of proofs, or by a circular argument, which are fallacies. Therefore, there are no justified true beliefs, and knowledge is impossible. Well, premise 1 is indeed sound. Beliefs we hold are either held via them being self-evident, which we call basic justified beliefs, or by virtue of them being proven by other proofs, that is to say, they are inferentially justified. Premise 2, however, is incorrect, and for those who believe in truth, the foundationalists would argue that there are basic true beliefs. If premise is indeed false, then premise 3 is also false, and the resultant trilemma falls apart. While there are many schools of thought among those of us who believe in truth, I will argue for foundationalism here. The skeptical argument is often laid out as the Munchausen trilemma. The trilemma claims that since truth claims need a proof, and the same is needed for the proof, and all subsequent proofs, the apparent impossibility of proving truth claims is apparent, and to the skeptic, this forces us into three options. 1 is a circular argument, where the theory and the proof support each other. We could say, for example, that God is authoritative because the Bible says so. The Bible is authoritative on this because God says so. This is an example of a circular argument, and regardless of the truth about the Scripture or God, an argument such as this is invalid. As we can see, circular arguments are logical fallacies and cannot warrant a justified belief. Perhaps we could go to a regressive argument instead, where the proofs simply go on ad infinitum, where a truth claim requires an infinite number of proofs. But given that we are finite beings, we cannot have an infinite number of proofs, making this argument a failure. Lastly, perhaps arguments could operate on axiomatic claims, that is, that a belief is formed from arguments using accepted or presupposed precepts. For example, I am a man. Men are not cats. Therefore, I am not a cat. I axiomatically assert the first two premises without any further proofs. This will be argued for in this video. It is worth mentioning that the skeptic hypothesis can be refuted from the issue of self-refutation. Premise 1, the Munchausen trilemma, is a truth claim asserting that no one may come to truth claims. Premise 2, truth claims are impossible in skeptical epistemology. Premise 3, the Munchausen trilemma is therefore negated. The argument defeats itself. It is a truth claim asserting that there is no such thing as valid truth claims, a contradiction. An example of the obvious problems and failures of skepticism, particularly of academic skepticism, is the teaching of English philosopher David Hume. While making no rigorous defenses of the evil demon hypothesis or of the Munchausen trilemma, he nonetheless wrote against those who made truth claims with human reason and argumentation, especially against those who believed in God. Instead, he thought of a simple academic skepticism, one that avoided the lofty claims of classical metaphysics or of formal logic. He vaguely insisted that we form beliefs from the ordinary wisdom of nature, as he says, rather than the fallacious deductions of our reason. To quote him, he speaks that one with reason, upon being brought into this world, he would indeed immediately observe a continual succession of objects, and one event following another, but he would not be able to discover anything farther. He would not, at first, by any reasoning, be able to reach the idea of cause and effect. since the particular powers by which all natural operations are performed never appear to the senses, nor is it reasonable to conclude, merely because of one event, in one instance, precedes another, that therefore the one is the cause, the other is the effect. Their conjunction may be arbitrary and casual. David Hume, The Enquiry Concerning Human Understanding. Hume's critique of cause and effect, to be simplified, is as follows. All knowledge is from sensory experience. This is the philosophy of empiricism. Premise 2. No obvious necessary connection between cause and effect. So when we strike a nail with a hammer, for example, we see the nail move and dig in, though we do not see the causal force that the hammer in theory communicates to said nail. Premise 3. David Hume asserts that cause and effect to us is not gleaned from rational deduction or observation, but is merely custom or habit, where we are conditioned to expect the effect from the cause. In conclusion, cause and effect is just something we impose onto the world around us. The connection between cause and effect is merely assumed rather than known or observed. Philosopher Immanuel Kant corrects David Hume. He notes that causality is not a mere habit or custom derived from mere human inductive reasoning and experience, but rather that causation is a necessary condition for experience itself. He employs the use of synthetic a priori judgments, that is, truths about reality that we know apart from experience, and yet which still obviously provide valid information about the world around us. Thus, while we cannot derive causality from mere experience, it is an entity which is necessary for all human experience to even operate on in the first place. He notes further that when we perceive events occurring in a sequence, the mind necessarily perceives them in causal terms. In other words, the notion that the hammer that hits the nail did so via cause and effect is not derived from any observation, but is imposed by the mind itself on the concept of experience. Causality, then, is not something that we erroneously infer from a sequence of events, but is something that the mind always and necessarily presupposes for experiences to objectively exist and be ordered and perceived at all. Consider the perception of lightning, which is followed by thunder. Hume would have us believe that it's a naive assumption to say that lightning produces the sound of thunder, and is merely inferred arbitrarily by us, noticing that it usually happens afterward. It is merely induction for David Hume. Yet, as Kant corrects him, he asserts that the very action of seeing these events in succession necessarily applies the universal concept of cause and effect unto them, which properly organizes and makes sense of the relationship between them. Hume is equally refuted by philosopher Elizabeth Anscom from her essay on causality and determination. Anscom says that we do not need to see a connection between the cause and the effect for the causal relationship to be real. This demand of Hume is childish and unscientific, as plenty of scientific truths and axioms exist beyond basic observation. Yet, with experimentation and better advancements in technology and tools, the causal forces become very clear in the realm of physics, chemistry, and the wider physical sciences. Anscombe notes that if cause and effect were merely habits which we draw from our expectations and experiences, rather than being a real thing, everyday life would be impossible to operate, as we couldn't truly make sense of actions and their consequences. The implications of this are vast. Human advancements in technology are theoretically impossible, yet made consistently and constantly by scientists all the time. Despite being biological creatures with innate drives and perceptions, and thus rightly associating dangerous behaviors with bad outcomes, David Hume would have us believe that the touching of the hand to the flame doesn't truly prove the cause and effect of getting burned, but that we only arbitrarily come to the conclusion to avoid touching fires. This is absolutely absurd. Cause and effect is scientific, and is beyond debate for anyone with even a rudimentary education. The intelligent man, upon recognizing patterns, rightly assumes a causal connection, and upon scientific or logical research, he confirms it with deductive, not inductive reasoning, using physiochemical laws of nature as our rule. Hume's skepticism is dated, inaccurate, and refuted. Another common iteration of the skeptical hypothesis is the brain in a vat argument. As absurd as the conclusions of academic skeptics are, as we have seen, perhaps nothing they espouse is as laughable as the brain in the vat hypothesis, whereby it is stated that perhaps our perceptions and rationality are merely illusions and flawed, as we are mere brains hooked up and being manipulated in some evil scientist's lair. While without any data or evidence to back them up, like all such arguments of the skeptics, it nonetheless tries to undermine the reliability of sense perception and our ability to form justified beliefs. There are numerous problems with this thought experiment. Philosopher Hilary Putnam explains that for this brain to form beliefs like "I am a brain in a vat," it must have access to the real-world concepts of brain and vat. Yet this brain has never experienced the real world, only the test tube it's suspended in. Therefore, concepts like brain and vat are utterly meaningless to it. The skeptical hypothesis assumes the very world it tries to deny, which is an impossibility. Christian philosopher Alvin Plantinga further notes that from the perspective of evolutionary biology, if our cognitive faculties evolve to aid us in survival in the world, then they are generally reliable in forming true beliefs about the world. Therefore, if we were merely brains in a vat, we would not have developed such cognitive faculties and abilities, as we wouldn't even have an external environment to live in and to adapt to, as the brain is ever secure and safe in the scientist's vat. Therefore, skeptical conclusions and proofs, as we have seen, are absurd and are not to be taken seriously, and are laughably self-defeating, as we apparently should be skeptical of all and know nothing, except, of course, that academic skepticism is true. Very profound. Against the claims of the skeptics, we will be giving a defense of foundationalism as the valid approach to epistemology. Foundationalism asserts that there are such things as basic justified beliefs apart from inferentially justified beliefs. Our experiences often stand to justify beliefs we hold, as do principles that are self-evident. Though there are varying types of foundationalists, I argue here for deductivism, whereby deductive logic can lead to truth claims if and only if the premises are correct and if the logic is valid, giving a valid argument. The following syllogism is an example of deductivism at work. Premise 1. Socrates is a man. Premise 2. Men are not horses. Conclusion. Socrates is not a horse. As we can see, the logic is clear, and the premises are correct, and therefore the conclusion is by definition valid. This is very different from inductive reasoning, whereby we assert conclusions from mere experiences. For example, one might say that every day the sun has risen and later set, and therefore it will do the same tomorrow. While induction is very intuitive and a great place to start forming our beliefs, it is not a real argument, as it does not guarantee a correct belief and conclusion. However, various examples exist of axiomatic, self-evident truths that do not fall into skepticism or opposing systems such as infinitism and circular arguments. An obvious example of a self-evident, basic justified belief is the law of noncontradiction, where it is stated that A cannot be A and not A in the same time and place. This is a fairly self-evident axiom, and ironically, attempts to reject it must use it to do so. Imagine if a physicist erroneously claimed that the universe both exists and doesn't exist at the same instance. Ignoring that this is false, let's see the physicist's argument. Premise 1. The law of non-contradiction requires that A cannot be not A and A in the same setting and time. Premise 2. The universe has proven to be real and false in the same instance. Conclusion. The law of non-contradiction can be false. The enormous issue here is that the argument claims a contradiction between the law of non-contradiction and the field of physics, rendering the law false. In other words, the physicist utilized the law of non-contradiction to try to falsify the law of non-contradiction. Something cannot be both categorically true and false at once. This does not correspond to reality and is false. Another example are logical tautologies. For example, we may say either it will rain tomorrow or it won't in O'Fallon, Missouri. This proposition is true as one half of the propositional options must be correct. For example, in the law of identity, where A is equal to A, is another self-evident tautology. It is true without further inference or appeals to other proofs. These, plus other mathematic axioms, demolish the skeptical claims with relative ease, making the skeptical thesis seem more of a fun thought experiment rather than a valid approach to epistemology. Given then how feeble the skeptical thesis has been shown to be. Such a simple and silly worldview can be best refuted simply. From St. Augustine's City of God, he says, "If I am mistaken, I exist." The skeptic may prattle on about doubting the world around us, yet ultimately, the very act of self-introspection and rational questioning proves the existence of the self and the mind. And if I exist, I have no reason to arbitrarily doubt the world around me or any other truth claims without evidence. Truth is real and is available to us all. Skepticism is not coherent and is no threat to Christian theism or any truth claims whatsoever, not now or ever.